Hello, and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Sam Becker.
Thank you for having me on, Camela. Like she said, my name is Sam Becker. I'm a mindset coach for entrepreneurs, primarily working with coaches and with digital entrepreneurs as well.
So people may hear that introduction and be like, okay, what does that have to do with marketing ops? Well, the demand for marketing ops is really, really high, and we're seeing more and more people moving to consulting and starting up their own business. So I would love for you to explain in a little more depth what a mindset coach is, because when I first heard of it, I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. And it sounds like what you described it. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. No, of course. When I first decided to be a mindset coach, I honestly had no idea what a mindset coach was either. So when I started to dabble into that space, that field, I really got, kind of like my own kind of rhythm with it, and where I didn't even realize what I was doing was essentially what mindset coaches do. So essentially what I do is help people that are struggling with mental blocks and negative beliefs and destructive thought patterns and a lack of self-belief kind of thing, right? So I help them avoid the habits that are inevitably going to be helping you succeed in whatever field that you are looking to go into. And I really help people avoid the pitfalls of burnout and like I said, the negative mental blocks.
Yes, and burnout is a concept that's very near and dear to marketing operations, which is another reason I was excited to have you on. Before we dig into burnout more, I would love to talk through why mindset is so important for career growth and some common hurdles people face in moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah. So it plays a huge, massive role in my opinion, in everything that you do. I think because mindset, it plays such a big role in your day-to-day decisions, how you're going to approach the day in general. So it's not just for businesses or entrepreneurs, it goes into your personal lives as well. I use the example of, let's just pretend that you're walking into the kitchen with your coffee, right? You're going back into your room or whatever, and you happen to spill it. Depending on whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood, it determines how you're going to feel about that coffee being spilled. If you're in a bad mood, you're going to be pissed off and say things like, this is how the day's going to go. Great, just my luck. If you're in a good mood, you might just say, okay, no problem. Let me get a towel, clean it up. Right. So I really feel that mindset has a huge role into how you feel about the entire day moving forward. A lot of common mindset issues that I do see start within a lack of confidence in a lot of things, right? If you're starting something brand new, of course, you're going to have the feeling of not feeling confident because you're not competent in that thing yet. It's because you lack clarity on feeling like you can do something without being able to have done it successfully yet. And there's a great quote by Tony Robbins, right? That I kind of live by, and I preach this a lot to my clients, right? Is, I'm going to butcher it. It's not word for word, but you'll get the concept. It's when you have to have done something to feel confident, you're severely limiting how much you can actually achieve. So a lot of things it always stems into is like self-doubt and hesitation, but that can also come into play like procrastination, imposter syndrome, like you said, not feeling like you know enough, or might feel like you have some type of fraud mentality, which is such a big false belief that we tell ourselves. We need to know everything in order to be able to charge or do what we need to do to advance our career. So I think those are like the biggest common things. Even myself, when I first started, growing a business or working for anyone, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells, like I was going to be fired or I'm not doing as good of a job as someone else. I was comparing myself to other people. Those are the biggest things I would say that I see most often.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. I've seen people turn down positions because they don't have experience in that very specific technology, but they've managed like technology before. And I'm just like, oh no, you didn't need to do that. So it's sometimes feels safer not to try because you can't fail if you don't try, but you also can't succeed. And that's such a huge thing to focus on. So when we think we have a lack of autonomy and these other things, a lot of times I'm not blaming people. I mean, there are people in bad work situations and some of them should be avoided, but there are situations in which we have a lot more control than we want to give ourselves credit for.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So What do you see as the top leading indicators that someone's headed for a burnout spiral?
That's a really good question. I think honestly, what it most of the time comes down to is that there's not a real set kind of an expectation to when our day ends or what's expected of us, right? There's not enough boundaries being put in place to where we can avoid the burnout, which is, it's such a sad thing, just looking at like statistics on how many people suffer from burnout. Mm-hmm. And I think it stems from a lack of really understanding on how burnout even happens. How did we get to this place, right? And I think, if I'm talking about different, entrepreneur types, let's just use them as an example, right? It's, we're a lot more susceptible because we're a lot more passionate about what we do. So we tend to work alone and we just work all the time. There's no end game. Same thing with any other field. If you work those long hours without having the expectation of, or boundaries set that I'm going to be here from here this time to this time, then you're going to be setting yourself up for a path leading to burnout, which would inevitably lead to stress and more complicated issues like depression and, heart disease, that kind of stuff. Those are all statistics. I even read something in the Harvard Business Review that they surveyed like over 300 members of the BNI, right? The Business Networking International. And I thought it was interesting because they were talking about a lot of stuff with a fixed mindset. People that experience burnout have a lot more of a fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is the ones that feel like they need to work a lot harder. They feel like they need to get this done or just get this last task done real quick. And it's 9 p.m. They're really trying to burn themselves out without even realizing it. But if they have that understanding, they would be able to know that this is probably not good because this will be here tomorrow. Right. But when we're trying to get the last little bit of things done, it's really hard to turn that side of our brains off to be able to use it for, the energy for the next day. So I feel like not having that boundary set up in place is really, really important.
Yeah. And as somebody who's struggled with burnout myself, I'm hearing a lot of things that you're spot on. I've had bosses have to tell me, we're not saving lives here. It's just data. It'll be here tomorrow. Like it was my expectation I was trying to live up to and the hours I thought I should be working. It wasn't in alignment with what other people perceived. And I think sometimes it's easier to just try to make do with what you have than risk conflict. I don't know if conflict's the right word, but challenging leadership over more business resources by coming up with a business case and doing all that work.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit more about what you mean by boundaries, because I think some people might think of oversharing or something like that, but I think it's much more straightforward.
It's a lot more straightforward than I think people would assume. I feel like the word boundary sounds a little bit more like confrontational. And that's not exactly what I'm referring to when it comes to like boundaries, right? It can be confrontational, but in a healthy way. You don't want to talk to someone when you're in a bad mood or something just negative is circulating your mind, right? Because you're going to say things you don't really mean because you're not in the best mindset. Like you ever argued with your significant other or a friend and you're pissed off and you share these things, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to say that. I'm so sorry. Right. Same thing. You're going to need to protect yourself and not burn any bridges here. So what you can do obviously is set those boundaries with your superiors and let them know how you're doing, how you're feeling. If you're feeling exhausted, they're not going to want you to stick it out and work, another 12 hours or whatever, right? To just get the job done. Like you said, we're not saving lives here, even though it feels like we are because we put that on ourselves. But I think what setting boundaries can look like for a lot of healthier ways, it can be as simple as, time blocking, certain tasks. So you're not doing, 4 hours straight of something, but these next 2 hours are dedicated to this task or the other task, right? Having a good, healthy time management skills are really, really important. I think that goes hand in hand with protecting like your calendar. Do you have family that you want to get home to and spend time with, or are you always like on call? If you feel like you're always on call, then that's an easy way for you to feel like you're going to be reaching out into burnout territory. So a couple of things that I do, one of my coaches actually just introduced me to this little gem of an idea earlier today, actually. And this goes for more people that are like working from home, right? That the family and kids kind of thing. And she introduced me to the do not disturb door sign. So you don't have to constantly text your family or roommates or whoever you work with, right? You just leave it on the door saying, Jeannie is hard at work or whatever. So you know that no one's going to barge in and say, hey, do you have a quick minute? That really helps set up boundaries too. So you don't lose focus on what you're trying to work on. Another thing that I like to do is there's an app called Flora. For those who have heard of the Pomodoro technique, right? That's basically establishing a good productivity session. And the Flora app, Flora, is great because you can actually set up, it's free, by the way. You can set up like a time frame on how much you really want to dedicate to a certain task at hand. So setting like a mental boundary for yourself, saying, okay, good, I have 15 minutes to get this and focus on only this, which is essentially what the Pomodoro technique teaches, right? It really helps you increase your productivity without feeling like you can just kind of wing the rest of your day by doing emails and checking your texts and then checking the data and then doing other tasks, multitasking. It's not a good thing.
Yeah, humans aren't very good at context switching. We give ourselves more credit than is due, for sure.
I agree. Yeah, we try to multitask, and we sometimes we can get away with it, but when it comes to actually protecting like your calendar and getting as much done so you're not working into the wee hours of the night, this app is great because it really helps me when I know, especially when it's something I don't really want to do. I don't really have the most excitement towards, but I know it needs to get done. I'll just set, a Flora app timer for 25, 30 minutes and just sit down and focus on only that. And it really helps me with my productivity. But I think the biggest thing with boundaries that it always comes down to, I saved it for last because this is the one that I hold dear to my heart, is again, going back to the set your proper expectations and have a strong communication habit. When you have a strong communication habit, everything else just seems to fall in line. That goes with relationships, that goes with business relationships, that goes with anything. Having that strong communication is just going to help you really not be misunderstood on both ends.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I've had to remind myself to look at others as coming from just assume they're coming from a positive space and not assuming that they understood what I said and are just doing the complete opposite. Right. So when communicating, anybody who's worked in systems and analytics knows that the person can be nodding and giving you all the signals that they understand what you're talking about. And then when you ask them to repeat it back, it's completely off base, like different planet. And we all have different communication styles. Mm-hmm. So can you give me some examples of how to effectively set better boundaries through communication?
Sure, absolutely. I think if you break down, communication, exactly what you said was a perfect example. Like, what is communication? If I said, Camela, I want you to repeat after me. And then I say purple grapes, and you say, that's perfect. Yes. You said yellow pineapple, right? It's like there's a miss there. Maybe I'm not describing the purple grape to you as well as I would hope. Obviously, it's a silly kind of analogy there, but it kind of goes in hand with, especially, especially when you're trying to lead a team or just relay a certain thing. Like if you're trying to outsource something, or if you're just trying to talk to a coworker about something you're struggling with, right? When you make it as clear as possible that there's no room for misinterpretation, things go a lot more smoothly. If you are just kind of half-assing, an email to someone that is very ambiguous and it could be left up to different interpretations, it's really hard to really nail down the back and forth in a very short amount of time frame, which inevitably just takes longer if you don't just sit down for another 30 seconds and revisit what you're trying to say. So what I like to do is just make sure that it makes sense. So if I'm explaining something, I always pause and say, does that make sense? And if I see the look of confusion on someone's face, or if they just tell me that something is like, okay, I don't really understand this, no problem. Let me reiterate this in different ways so it makes sense to you. Taking that extra little bit of time really makes a huge difference. It doesn't seem like it does. It sounds like it's like more tedious and annoying to have to do that. But when you start practicing that, I guarantee people are going to respect you a lot more, because they're going to feel like that not only are you taking care of them, but they feel heard, they feel listened. And there's a lot more respect, unspoken respect, when you start to really take that time to make sure that the other person is understanding. That's how communication flows. when there's a constant loop of understanding.
Have you been burned by attribution? Are you tired of fighting with salespeople over target accounts and lead scores? We've all been there, and that's because traditional marketing analytics tools bolt onto your CRM and calculate attribution and engagement scores on the data as it is. And let's face it, most of the time, your CRM data is far from perfect. Caliber Mind is unique because it pulls data from all your sources, not just your CRM, into a data platform. Caliber Mind unifies your information, which means you can attribute dollars to website activity, standard Salesforce campaign activity, and more, without wasting time in spreadsheets. Ditch the spreadsheets and check out a new way to analyze revenue data with Caliber Mind at calibermind.com. Yeah, and I think it's really important just to reiterate a few things you've already said is communication isn't binary. So what I write may mean something else to somebody else. So if I say to a boss, I need a healthy work-life balance, they may say, okay, and they think they have that and they work until 11 p.m. every day and they take one day off on the weekend. And that's not at all what it looks like for me. So it's very important to get really specific and say, I need to know that you'll trust me to get my work done and that I can step away during the day to take care of family or do whatever. And as long as I'm getting my work done, I want that to be enough. Does that meet your expectation?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Do you expect specific hours? Have that conversation. And the earlier in your employment you can have that conversation, I've found the easier it is to set and reinforce boundaries. Because if you're trying to change the dynamic that's already in place, I feel anyway, it's much harder. Have you seen success with just really rigid communication and repetition there? Or do you agree that sometimes it can be a little harder?
I definitely, I guess it just depends on everyone's definition of rigid communication kind of thing. So I do want to point out that you did mention the importance of being specific and being very clear in your communication. That is the key element to your communication. Are you crystal clear on what you're trying to say? If you say, I want a healthy living situation or a healthy work environment, of course, that's going to be a whole different thing. Healthy meaning always a glass of water on my desk, or does that mean I always have a plant on my desk, or whatever? That could look like 1,000 different things. What I like to do is be a little bit more direct. Obviously, keep the politeness in there, right? Don't lose your mannerisms. But when you are directing something let's just use that for example, I like to say something like, I would prefer to have a healthier work environment, such as colon, and then start listing out some things that you mean, so that there's no ambiguous factors there where your boss is not really thinking, okay, healthy, what does that mean? Do you want more sunshine in your desk? Do you want a fan? What does that mean? Yeah. But by being able to bullet point, I was taught, I think pretty early on, even when I worked for another employer, right, that you don't come to the boss unless you have with an issue. You don't go to the boss with an issue unless you have some type of an idea for a solution. That's how you really, Great advice. Good advice. Because in that way, you're just bringing them more stuff to pile on their desk, and they'll get to it when they get to it. It's not that important. But if you present them with something that it takes their mind off of that problem because you already did the work. Not only does it solve a problem with you, they're just granting you permission. That's great communication, right? Problem and solution. But it also shows your bosses that you are a problem solver, that you are good to work on your own. There's a lot of unspoken boundaries that are set there also. They can look at you and say, I trust this person because they've come to me with issues and they fixed it on their own. I mean, I'm not saying to go to your boss and bother them with every little problem, like the trash can hasn't been emptied in a week. I'm talking about real life issues or real business issues or whatever. But that's been a really big, helpful factor for me too, is showcasing strong communication in a problem-solving environment also.
And then also, I just want to kind of point out that so much of communication is nonverbal. So
true. Very true.
As a writer, I hate to say this, but you're more apt to be in an argument over email or text than you are face-to-face. And part of that is just de-anonymizing the transaction. So you're following more social guidelines while you're interacting. We see this on social media all the time where people blast each other and say things they never say to each other in person. But the other big part of that is being able to use hand motions, emphasize, so the person can actually see what is the most important to you and has a better chance to communicate to you in some way that they don't understand what you're saying. Like you mentioned, the look of confusion.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's really key, which is makes the world we live in right now even harder because we live in such a sensitive society, like you said, with like Instagram and Facebook texts and all that stuff. It's really easy to misinterpret a lot of things. But I think on a lot of levels, God did bless us with emojis. We can actually set the tone. But then there's always the idea that if you send a smiley face, it's condescending, right? There's always something. I think it just really depends on how you structure what you're saying. A lot of times what I do, and this works with relationships, right? My fiance and I, we really need to preface a lot of our conversations with the tonality that we are kind of expecting to translate to them. So by saying, so we're both problem solvers, right? Mm-hmm. We both want to save the world. And when there's an issue that she has, I'm always trying to find solutions. And
there's not always what they want. Yeah.
It's not. They just want to be heard. They want to vent. They want to complain. And I get that. And it's not like me to say, okay, great. Yeah, that is really hard, honey. I'm sorry to hear that sucks. But when you are trying to preface the conversation, it really helps by saying stuff like, I don't really want advice right now. Yep. I just want to complain. I just need somebody to hear me out right now. Yep. So by prefacing a lot of things, that's really saved us a lot of like future conflicting conversations, because now we know what the other person wants and needs, and then they get into what they have to say. I think that will go a long way. Same thing with your bosses. Like, hey boss, I know you're busy. I just want to let you know we're in good spirits over here. I'm a little worried about this, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. As opposed to, we got a big problem, mayday, kind of thing.
SOS.
A lot of translation is hard when you can't see them face to face. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear about the smile being condescending, but then I have a bunch of family in the South. And when you have somebody who's saying something very sweetly, but it's a huge insult, like, bless your heart, we always call those chocolate covered spiders. And I'm like, got it. Yeah, no, yeah. I hear that.
Those chocolate covered spiders. Yeah. Cause have you ever seen someone, I have a lot of joking friends, right? So that's kind of where I got that from. But I know the rest of the social media platforms can probably relate to this too. And we won't go into too much social media talk, but right. Just to make that a little bit more clear on what I meant by that was someone texted me saying, hey, your shirt looks dumb, smiley face. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I know they're not mad at me, but I know they're being a jerk. So it's just kind of like funny.
No offense, but right. You just know that the next thing is going to be the most offensive thing you've ever heard in your life. It's
and that's the exact way on how not to preface a conversation,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that because I use that with my husband too. I'll say, I don't want advice. I just want to vent. I just need to talk for a couple of minutes. And then I do this with bosses too, where I'd be working on a SQL problem and they didn't know SQL. And I'm like, I know you're not going to get this. I just need you to nod as I talk because I'm a verbal processor and I need to do this in order to solve the problem. And they're like, okay. And then when I walk away, they're like, oh my God.
Right. Exactly. If you think about it, communication is the number one thing that we need to really focus a lot of energy on. That goes with anything, with dogs and humans and foreign languages and English. Like it's all a matter of how you communicate. Sign language, you can't hear, but you can sign, right? And for the deaf, there's the oh my gosh, what is it called? The
ASL.
Yeah, you go.
Sign language. Yeah.
With that, yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's funny because as you were talking about setting boundaries, I kept thinking of dog training with positive reinforcement and how you have to be consistent and very clear and.
Exactly. And then that's really important, is to feel like we're talking about burnout here. That's really important too, to feel like your time is being spent in the right areas. Like, what's the reward? Are you going home fatigued and exhausted? Then something needs to change. What's the reward in it for you? Are you being compensated enough to justify those hours and justify missing your family and all the things that you really want in life, your hobbies, your travel, all that stuff. That's all really, really important, which kind of circles into the self-care territory, right? That's really, really important for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think people have heard it so much, they roll their eyes, they get desensitized to the concept. But personally, I've found it to be absolutely critical in retaining any level of happiness. If we can talk about self-care and what that looks like for people, because I think it's different for everyone.
Yeah, and you can make that as simple or complicated as you really want. And I'll be with the eye rollers at first, because just a handful of years ago, when I was struggling with massive, like debilitating anxiety, when my therapist used to tell me, we need to get you more in line with self-care, I'm like, what does that even mean? What is self-care? I'm here, aren't I? So it really depends on the person, what self-care looks like to you. Because I mean, I can tell everyone to go spend 10 minutes reading a book, and the people that hate books are not going to really jive with that too much. Mm-hmm. They're going to probably think, I don't want to read a book. This is more punishment. I'm feeling burnt out because now you're making me read a book. So self-care has a lot of different, things that fall into those categories. It could be as simple as literally just treating yourself to a 5-minute break and go taking a walk outside and getting some sunshine. Mm-hmm. That's really important. I actually did that earlier today, and that was very, very helpful to my whole mindset and well-being. Self-care looks like can look differently to a lot of different people, right? Like I said, it kind of depends on the person. What would make you happy? What would fuel your soul? For me, I really try to value, sleep is really important. So if I can make my nighttime routine look a little bit better, for me, I love to have a cup of tea. I love to have a cup of tea before bed, and then I go to sleep, and I tend to sleep fairly decently better compared to trying to rush myself to sleep. Have you ever had a trip or maybe even something big happening the next day and you feel too excited to go to sleep, or that it's late and you should be sleeping, but it's stressful and you can't go to sleep? Yep. So it's like not prioritizing your sleep is a huge thing. Also, that doesn't exactly scream self-care, but it's one of the biggest things that you can do. Exercising, drinking a glass of water every hour or something, or even just having one healthy meal a day. You're going to feel so much different than you would if you were to just eat junk the rest of the day and, reach in that drawer of your candy drawer at work. That's for a Snickers. There's a lot of different things that you can do for self-care. Personally, I love to take my mini breaks and go, either take a walk my dog, or just step away and maybe just lay down for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Just for 5 minutes, just to like rest my body, rest my mind, and then come back and attack what I needed to attack in the first place. Exercise is really important to me. And these are all things that I kind of came out of necessity to combat my anxiety, right? So it just kind of flowed. Like I said, it flowed very naturally for me to become a mindset coach, because the things I was already doing, it just made it easier for me to kind of preach the importance of self-care, because I was actively doing it. And I know that it made such a big difference in my life as well. So I think focus on what really fuels your soul and start incrementally adding things every other day, or once a week, or at the very, very minimum once a week, 5-10 minutes, just to do something to really break up your day and do something for you. That's unapologetically for you in a healthy way. I have to add the healthy way part. So.
Yes. Yeah. Not binging on something bad. I think we kind of accept that physical health is on a spectrum, and we're not at a point yet in the society. It's getting much, much better, but we're not quite at the point where everybody thinks of mental health the same way. And at different points in your life, you're going to be somewhere on the spectrum. And sometimes you're going to be low, sometimes you're going to be high. It's going to vary. And I think it's really important for people to understand and reflect on what recharges them and feeds their soul, like you said. Right. So for me, that might look like yoga and meditation and having really strong boundaries around when I am and am not at my computer, or having some kind of like signal that I'm starting my workday and I'm leaving it, because we're all working at home right now. For my husband, that means running like 9 to 15 miles a day, which is, it doesn't make sense to me. And that wouldn't be self-care for me, but I'm glad it works for him. Yeah. It just looks different for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I can agree. Like I'm not a big runner either at all by any means, but I do love to go to the gym. Like that's a really good way for me to really get away from the workspace. Because if I'm near my computer, I'm going to work. Because one of the things that I laugh about is people ask me, what do you enjoy to do? What are your hobbies? What do you do in your free time? And I'm like, well, shoot, I don't really know. I work a lot, but
that's a red flag. That's a red flag that you need to figure out what brings you joy.
I have a lot of, but it's broken up work. I should add that part. It's broken up work. So I don't work constantly. Right. But when I think about it, I'm like, I do love to go to the movies. I do love to, go to the gym, but the gym is like the biggest thing for me too. That's where you really start to focus your mind on other things. And you're clearing your mind of your work because you're not there, you're not around it. You can not really easily do that from your phone. So as I'm at the gym, I really just try to unwind my thoughts and really just focus on the task at hand, what I'm doing. And then I feel really good. Go home with my protein shake, take a nice shower. And then I just get back into the flow of where I left off on work. Because let's face it, it'll be there tomorrow. It'll be there later on, right? You don't have to kill yourself every single minute of every single day to try to get everything done when it's going to be there tomorrow too.
Yeah. And I like what you said about being able to focus on what you're doing in that moment instead of thinking ahead or behind.
Right.
I think that's so critical to recharging. Like, think of how little we actually think about what we're doing while we're cooking dinner and what a different experience it would be if we just focused on what we were doing.
Yeah.
I always listen to a podcast while I'm doing it, but when I do take the time to mindfully do something, it's completely different.
Yeah, when you start thinking about everything that you do with the idea of where the intention is coming from or what the expectation is when you go into it, like for me, sitting down like maybe a year or two ago when I was just obsessed with work, right? And this is how I really learned how to combat, burnout, was because this is something that I've lived myself. When it was something like taking a break to go watch a movie at the movie theaters, right? I would think, oh my gosh, like I'm taking myself away from what I need to be doing. And it was stressful. And
you feel guilty.
Exactly. I couldn't really enjoy watching the movie or doing whatever it was because I knew that all this time, like time is money, right? That's such a negative way of looking at it. Yes, you want to use your time wisely, but you don't want to spend all of your time, right? Mm-hmm. And because you want to make money, but you want to be able to enjoy your money also, right? So when I'm sitting at the movies, stressed out, thinking I should be somewhere else, it takes me a long time to settle in, and it would actually stress me out to the point where I'd feel anxious and feel anxiety. So when you're going to the movies, you're consciously, and this is just an example, whatever it looks like to you guys, right, is when you consciously make the decision to do something, be in that moment. Because when you are not in that moment, you're going to be stressed out, and you might be feeling anxious as well, right? For those that have anxiety, know what I'm talking about. So it just really makes a huge difference to have a different mindset of the things that you're doing when you're doing them.
Yeah, I'm just struck that this is really living your values and prioritizing yourself in a way that's healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We got to take care of ourselves because no one else is going to, right?
Yes. Self-advocacy is important. And I think that's been the theme throughout this, really, in setting boundaries and kind of speaking up for yourself. And you don't have to do it in an unkind way. In fact, you probably shouldn't because you're going to go in the opposite direction you want to go. But
right. Exactly. Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Sam, thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
You can check me out on the social platforms. If you go to facebook.com/Sam P. Becker, you'll find me, or just search Sam Becker, you'll find me there. But Instagram is IM_Sam Becker, and I'll be there so you guys can check out the content and latest news and updates there. So Camela, thank you so much for having me on. This was my favorite topic to talk about, so I'm happy that you wanted me to be a part of this with you. It's an honor. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. And for those of you looking for more great content like this, check out calibermind.com.